First, just kind of, if you're good to talk about a little bit about yourself and your role in student affairs.
Sure. Thank you, Zoe, for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Rob Freidhoff. I serve as Interim AVP of Student Success at Valdosta State University. Valdosta State is down in Valdosta, Georgia, so very South Georgia. We are about 18 miles to the Florida border. And in that role, I oversee advising, orientation, first-year programs, tutoring, and dual enrollment. And have been part of the Appreciative Advising National Team. That's how I know Ben Forshee for about a decade. And my role originally at Valdosta State was related directly to advising, but recently had some of those new opportunities added to my area.
Awesome, thanks. And so in your role right now, how do you see students struggling or thriving throughout this pandemic? I talked to Jenny Bloom yesterday, and she kind of talked about how students are actually, she's realized that like a lot of students are actually doing really well throughout this pandemic. And so I thought that was a really interesting spin on things. But just from kind of your experience, how have students been dealing with this academically, but also non-academically, and just being in this transition?
Yeah, I think, one of the things we decided to do at VSU really early in the game as we started to go into this season, we established a concierge coaching program. And so we've got 290 staff and graduate assistants that are assigned over a little over 6,000 undergraduates on our campus. And the primary role of that concierge coach is to reach out to the undergraduate students as a check-in. So it's just another point of contact from VSU. So we're not asking them to be faculty. We're not asking them to be advisors or any of that. What we really have tasked them to do is call out and check in on our students and then get them connected to resources. And so we've had a relatively good firsthand view at how students are doing. And I would agree with what Dr. Bloom said. We really have seen in this season, for the most part, a lot of our students, while there was some trepidation at first, I think they've made the transition into online learning pretty smoothly. And I would say for the majority of our students, I think it has gone well. And I think that they're getting more used to what it looks like in the online world. I think they've also responded well to the concierge coaching. One of the things we were like, is this going to work? Is anybody really going to connect with a concierge coach? It's right at the end of the semester. They don't know these folks. And what we actually found is they were so thankful to have another point of contact at the institution reach out during this season that we've just really seen positive results from that concierge coaching. Now, what has come up, certainly, especially initially, was the concern about access with technology, access to internet and computing and different things like that. Thankfully, our university mobilized pretty quickly, and we were mailing out MiFis and laptops and iPads and different things like that. And so I think that initial who had access and didn't have access, we were able to work on fairly quickly. As time has gone by, I think more of it has been a little bit of a struggle on how do students get comfortable learning in a different way. There's a routine to the face-to-face setup that's there. And so I know my advising team and our concierge coaches have spent a lot of time talking about kind of build a consistent schedule throughout the day where you're doing study time at a certain time and you're taking a break and then you're going back into a different course and you're giving yourself enough time to do the work. And one of the other things we've talked a lot about for students in terms of being successful and navigating the system is our brains are super smart, right? They learn very quickly what tasks we're going to do based on the location that we're typically in. Which I think for some students has been hard to do their work from home because that's not necessarily where they've done all this schoolwork. And so we've talked to a lot of students who were initially struggling and saying, find a spot in your house, your apartment, wherever it is you're living, and try to make that little spot be where you do schoolwork every single day and where you're studying, where you're doing your exams. And over time, your brain's going to kind of learn, oh, hey, when I go to this room in the house, this is what I'm going to be doing. And I've actually seen that on my advising team, people who are struggling as staff members to initially make that transition home saying, hey, do you have a spare bedroom or whatever, where you literally can go in and work for the day with the door closed. And then when you walk out at 5 o'clock or 5:30, you can close that door and you're kind of done with your day. And so we've talked about the time management kinds of pieces, having physical locations where you do it, because again, your brain's really smart and learns on that stuff really fast. So I think as we've had some of those initial conversations with students about how to kind of break it down into manageable chunks, how not to sit there and try to watch 4 hours of video in a row, that's not going to work, right? So the more that we've had those kinds of conversations, I think students are starting to understand how to engage in the content in a meaningful way and get up and take breaks and different things like that. So I think overall we're feeling pretty good. Now we're coming here pretty close, like everybody, to the end of the semester, and we're definitely seeing an uptick in stress. That said, we see that when they're face to face. And so I think the only difference I've kind of heard this season versus previous seasons is the amount of times that students get for testing. It feels like to some of them that they've shortened the amount of time you can have to take the exam in the virtual world versus if they were sitting in a class. So we've had some issues around that, but I think when we connect those students back to the faculty, they can handle those kinds of conversations. And again, overall, I think for this mass experiment that we're in, I think it's been pretty positive for most students.
Yeah. And then I also was wondering, kind of, because we're in this, like you said, this time, this massive experiment, basically, where we're in, like, we've been switched to remote learning and remote work. How have you been able to, like, reflect on practices and change practices for remote learning? And would you take any of those practices moving forward once this is lifted?
That's a tough question. I think we're still kind of in the middle of it, right? I don't know that I've done a lot of active reflecting of what will this look like in fall based on what we learned. I mean, certainly we're learning through the process and having a lot of good conversations. I think I'm more certain than I've ever been about the importance of the relationship between a practitioner and a student. In the appreciative advising world, that disarm component. We've had lots of opportunities to practice getting to a point with students where they're comfortable having conversations. And the reality is there are still plenty of students that are struggling. We've got plenty of adult students that have lost jobs and now are in school and no longer have an income, and they've got kids at home and they're trying to work through that. That's really hard. We've got folks who have to go home and now live in challenging home environments, and we see that like a lot of other institutions do. And so we need to be people first. Yes, we've got to be professionals, but I think we've had an opportunity in this season to kind of share a little bit of who we are. I mean, I've got 5 kids at home. There's been some times I've been on webinars and my 5-year-old walks in, and that's okay, right? That's part of who I am, and that's part of part of what my story is. And so I think us being able to talk to people and first and foremost really check in and just see how they're doing, right? And if they're not being taken care of at the basic human need level, the schooling and all that is going to be really difficult. And kind of going back to concierge coaching, we've had opportunities to connect some of our students who are really struggling. They've lost jobs. They don't have the income there. They're not sure how they're going to pay rent. They're not sure how they're going to buy food. And we've got some means at the institution to get them connected and hopefully get them some resources. And so we've got to first be able to have enough of a relationship and disarm enough so that that person's willing to engage in that conversation and let us know what's going on. And then when we can kind of take care of that basic need and get them connected to the right resource, then we can have that conversation that we need to have related to academics and what everything looks like. And so I think, we'll learn more as we go through the process, but as I sit kind of in the middle of it right now, I'm more convinced than ever of the power of the appreciative advising framework and taking that time to disarm a student, discover a little bit about the students. I think it's also important for us to kind of, I think the assumption was everybody was going to be bad or it was all going to be really hard, right? And Ben Forshee did a really good webinar and kind of talked about what are some positive ways you can ask discover questions. And, we have found that what is something, positive you've learned about yourself in this situation, or what is something beneficial that has kind of come out of this time that maybe was a little bit unexpected and not necessarily desirable to start, but what have we learned about one another? And I think asking those positive questions has also elicited really good conversations. And those are some of the conversations our concierge coaches are having. And then also the academic advising teams are having too. So I think for us is not to kind of prejudge how a student's going to be doing, right? And that's no different, I guess, than if you're face to face. But I think because of all the other stuff going on, sometimes you can make an assumption that everybody's really struggling or everybody's great. The reality is everybody's in their own place. And truth be told, student might have an awesome morning and then a difficult afternoon. So depending on when you talk to them within the day, it could be a challenge. And so I think for me, the primary takeaway is still to continue to do what we do every day on an individual basis. And we never know where the student's going to be when they walk through our door. And what we've got to be is ready to engage in a conversation. And sometimes that conversation is relatively easy and fun for us to have and is very positive. And then in other scenarios, it's a really tough conversation. People are hurting and there's a lot of challenges that are out there. And we have an opportunity to step in at that time. And again, try to make sure they're taken care of as a human first, but then also try to help them be successful as a student. And I think that's kind of what I'm going to take away. The other big thing for us as a university, it has been a complete joy to work at Valdosta State in this season and just see how our entire university has come together to figure out how do we most help our students? How do we wrap services around them in a season that's challenged? So seeing all across these different divisions, everybody being willing to help and support has been really a huge benefit for me to see. I've really enjoyed working with people that I know a little bit, but I've gotten to know them pretty well as we really work to mobilize and do good things on our campus for students.
Yeah, I think what you